Welcome to Westworld FM, a podcast about HBO's Westworld. My name is Alex.
And my name is Nick.
Today we will be discussing episode 7 of the show, titled Trompe L'oeil, as far as I know, in my terrible French pronunciation.
I don't remember how it was even spelled.
It's TROMPEL''OEIL, which
Sure.
according to Emma Says videos on the interwebs is Trompe L'oeil.
And what does it mean?
Trompe l'oeil, the definition of trompe l'oeil is a visual illusion in art, especially as used to trick the eye into perceiving a painted detail as a three-dimensional object. But we will not be discussing any of the next time on preview at the end of the show, but we will be spoiling everything through episode 7 of the series, so please pause and go catch up if you're not current with the show. You can find more episodes of our podcast at westworld.fm. We're also Westworld FM on Twitter, and you can send feedback to westworldfm@gmail.com to tell us what you think of our show and share your thoughts on HBO's Westworld so we can read them on our show. Send us corrections, observations, or anything regarding Westworld or our podcast. Big news today. Westworld is being given a season 2.
Oh, yeah.
Very exciting. However, they said that it may take until 2018 to air, given how much of a production the show is. I think some of the comments or the things that people are reading off of it are that pushing True Detective Season 2 to come out a year later and how successful that was has made them kind of rethink how much they push people to deliver stuff to them so quickly. So it's cool that they're giving it room. However, 2018 is a long time away. But it should be okay. So... in the corrections department, this is a self-correction. I was listening to a few other Westworld podcasts. The Mexican town, I can never remember the name of it. It's called Las Mudas.
Las Mudas.
Las Mudas.
Mexican town.
So I'm sure I'll forget about it next time we actually have to talk about that place, if we do again. But
Las Mudas. I'll try
Las
to remember.
Mudas, yes. And then, so we've got some feedback, and these people either emailed us at westworldfm@gmail.com or they tweeted at us at westworldfm on Twitter. And we've got Jameson here. Quick note, since you were discussing the opening credits last week, I think the most poignant and symbolic moment in the credits is the skeletal hands playing the piano, and then releasing the player piano continues to play on its own. To me, this is a slick nod to the deistic themes of the show. The hosts are just beginning to operate on their own without the control of their maker. Arnold wound the clock and set it into motion. We just have to wait and see what part Ford plays. But my guess is at some point, we lose both creators, and hosts and humans get to learn how to exist together. So, and then he said, on the lines of religious motifs, if Ford is God to the host, does that make Arnold the spirit and Bernard the savior, created by Ford in Arnold's image? ? I don't know. There's been a lot of religious thematic stuff that people have been throwing out there. The Man in Black being the devil and all kinds of crazy stuff. I haven't tried to read into that too much, but yeah, Nick, you were talking about wanting to pull something a little more out of the credits. And I see what Jameson's saying. I think that's pretty interesting. You know, the moment where the hands kind of pull away and the piano keeps playing.
Yeah, that scene has always stood out for the obvious reason, like you said, that it starts being operated by hand and then remove, and it's able to continue on its own.
Yeah.
I think there's something between the player piano. The player piano is almost just the host at that point. I mean, the player piano almost becomes a stand-in for the host. It's this idea that, a piano was once an instrument that was created to make music, obviously, and then the player pianos always seem like such a novelty. They're there for like entertainment. They're there to like get giggles out of you.
Yeah.
Nothing as deep or moving as an actual piano is capable of doing. They always have that same rinky-dink tone to them. I guess honky-tonk being the better term. And they're just goofy to watch. And I think that almost in a way, humanity has kind of gone in Ford's eye, or maybe not in Ford's eye, because we know he cares about these things more deeply, but in terms of the park, humanity's kind of gone the route of this player piano, where humans or people are capable of creating great art and being these beings of much depth and worth, and they've been at the park reduced to a player piano, just this goofy, silly thing that you can. It's there for your amusement, and nothing further.
Yeah.
I also really like the first shot that it starts to look like it looks like a landscape, but it's really just a host being 3D printed.
Yeah,
put together.
absolutely. It's very like it looks like the sun kind of or the moon even.
And yeah, exactly.
horizon.
And it's almost the kind of the idea that these hosts are the frontier. They're the great undiscovered country.
Yeah. Well, on all this note, Alan, the creator of our theme at Westworld FM, wrote in to send us the link to artofthetitle.com/title/Westworld. They have a pretty big interview with Elastic, which is a big production company, post house kind of. They're doing all kinds of different stuff, but they've done a lot of credits for things like Luke Cage, and they did True Detective, and they're kind of in vogue right now in terms of creating titles. And they did the one for Westworld. And there's a very extensive interview with creative director Patrick Clare on their website. So check that out, artofthetitle.com/title/Westworld. I'll try and put that in the show notes as well. So, Jameson, thank you for the email. And then I've got a little bit more from Alan here. He said, those other podcasts often talk about how ridiculous some things are, like the abandoned lower levels or walking around with Maeve. But a few years ago, a coworker took me over to the old building my company used to be in. It was abandoned and gutted, full of old hardware, and really creepy. But it still had a few old computers it hooked up to some antenna on the roof. We had gone over to update them. Westworld seemed very realistic to me. Ditto for another place that I worked at, had a section that was one of the offices but became known as the morgue due to it being a storage place for old hardware and furniture. Yeah, I think that's pretty common for a lot of, especially bigger companies. You know, they move on from their old headquarters and they leave stuff behind, and it just so happens that Westworld is so uniquely situated that they still have it there. Like any other building would have been. Like for most workplaces, I feel like it's retail space that's being rented out and somebody else is going to come and fill it, and it all gets, brought back to life essentially. But for Westworld, it's all right there. So
and they just keep building up.
Probably. And then he said, and Maeve is a machine, so it would be like seeing the downstairs IT guy rolling a cart by your office with a computer or printer on it. That doesn't seem out of the ordinary to me. At a huge company I worked for, I often saw people I did not know wandering around carrying hardware. We were supposed to stop and challenge anyone we did not know in case they weren't supposed to be there, but no one ever did. We'd be doing that constantly due to the size of the company. Quote, not my job, end quote. And then he puts 0.02. It's his 2 cents. So,
yeah, I don't think we weren't saying that it was weird.
No,
she was walking around.
That's kind of what he's commenting on what other podcasts are pulling issues with, and they did. I felt very similarly to the way that he did, and I think
absolutely.
he wrote it very well. It just seemed like. Yeah, and there were a lot of people commenting about like, oh, they have cameras everywhere. Why aren't they watching this stuff? And we talked about last week that Destin had his sex video. Like Elsie had access to that, but nobody else has called him on it. Like, what the hell? So I feel like Westworld is a big machine that maybe there are some things that don't get that closely monitored.
Until there's a problem.
Until there's an issue, yeah.
Exactly.
So thank you, Alan, for writing in there. We had a quick little note from @KRRMCC on Twitter. They said, this feels trivial. This was the day after the election. But she said, this feels trivial, but I need some escapism today. Quote, Teddy is no longer the Zoolander of Westworld, end quote. Thanks for the levity with a smiley face. So, you're quite welcome for that. I think that was your line. I was not.
I'll take credit for that.
Yeah, I was not clever enough to say something like that, so that's good. And then we had some notes. Alan once again said more discussion, less recap for the win in terms of our new format. So thank you for that. We're going to continue with that this week, unless we hear any bad feedback there. And then Martin Hackett on Twitter @monkeys_dad said, Episode 5, in the chase to read meaning and minor details to second guess the plot, we are the Greyhound. Nolan's kind of taking the piss. So the story about the Greyhound chasing after the cat finally gets it, doesn't know what to do with itself.
I see.
We are sitting here chasing all of these trivial matters in
Westworld,
and ultimately, what does it mean to us?
Or what? Yeah, what? How do we come out ahead for having either guessed this or not? It's kind of echoes back to something we were talking about a couple weeks ago. Like, do you get more out of the show if you sit back a little bit more and let it unfold and savor it, or I think it kind of comes down to your personality. If you really enjoy solving riddles and puzzles. It's fun to deconstruct.
Yeah,
it's
it's hard for me to kind of figure out what I really like out of it, because I do love that whole. I love it when people are really smart. So like watching people dissect things and figure things out, it's interesting to me. But then at the same time, I also cherish like
it's
undoctored narrative experience, like, you know, so.
It's always fun watching something inspire people to want to dig so much deeper and to get so much more into something. It's nice. It takes a certain kind of story or a certain kind of experience to make people want to delve deeper.
Absolutely.
Like Southland Tales, not a great movie, but I really like it, and it made me want to dig deeper because I was so intrigued by this world. It's almost like the more that's set up and the less of it there actually is. If it clicks with you, you will want. It's like Destiny.
Yeah.
If we're gonna go talk video games, like there's so much. There's a wealth of. Now it's been mined. I don't want to say unmined, but there's a wealth of underlying story and content that you unlock in the game and you can read later.
Yeah.
But it's not there in the game. So in a way, you're like, well, it's not good that it's not there. But if the game,
you're hooked enough,
if the game clicks with you in terms of its world and its overall presentation, you will feel compelled to seek out more, and I think that's kind of cool.
Absolutely.
And Westworld is kind of that same way. At least as of right now, we are, you know, you and I and everyone listening and everyone watching right now, we're in the very fortunate position of being into the show while it's premiering, especially in this first season, before anybody really has any idea what shape it's taking. We're all standing too close to the painting. We haven't yet journeyed far enough from it to see the overall picture.
Absolutely.
And people, you know, 3, 4, or 5 years from now are going to start watching the show because it'll be on you know,
HBO
I don't want to say Netflix, but yeah, exactly. And they'll just be able to binge the whole thing, and they won't have the same experience that we are currently having. So take note and be proud of yourself, listeners, because you are experiencing history, and it's pretty awesome.
Absolutely.
People are going to look back and go, saw that coming, read about that.
Yeah, it's even something that I noticed with our Preacher podcast that we did, Gone to Texas. There were some people that are picking it up afterwards that weren't necessarily going to stop at each episode and listen to us.
Oh, exactly.
Because when you go to binge something, you like I wouldn't be able to stop watching Westworld to go and listen to somebody else talk about it.
We're not that compelling.
No, I would just barrel straight through it, you know? And so
you would listen to all of them back to back afterwards.
Yeah, probably.
And sometimes that's a little tedious. I don't want to diss on our show, but I had obviously, like the rest of America, marathon Stranger Things, and I found a pod. I've cycled through 3 awful podcasts about it. I was like, started listening. I was like, nope. And I found one I kind of liked, and I was like, okay. So I listened to the first episode, and I found myself getting a little impatient at times because they were stumbling around in the dark, going like, "Whoa, what about this?" Or they'd be way off track with some wild theory.
So that's why at the end of the season, we'll probably come back and do a season wrap up. Then at least those people who are barreling through, if they don't want to stop to smell the roses, then they can listen to us at the end of it all.
Or they could listen and just laugh at all of our blindly stumbling around, looking for the light switch and not hitting it, sticking our fork in a socket instead.
Absolutely. Maybe we don't see the light switch because we're not meant to.
Oh.
All right, and then we got one final message on Twitter from our friend Katrine. She said, "I'll keep it short. My main complaint with the show, I question the hold that Maeve has over the text. I don't understand why they would help her. It seems way too risky for them to help her. It seems like they're committing the ultimate sin against their employer, and I don't get what they get out of it." I want to stop. She's got 2 other points that she had here. It's getting a little bit harder for me. It's hard for me to understand why they wouldn't. I guess in the initial episode that they started really figuring things out, which I would say is probably the last episode.
Yeah, when did she send the feedback?
She sent the feedback today. She has seen the most recent
Gotcha.
one. Yeah.
I would agree.
So, and that's kind of the main thing, is that it feels like these guys would hopefully have the intelligence to be like, we've messed up here. There's some bad stuff happening. You guys need to this is not good. Maeve wants to escape the park. So I guess we'll see where it goes. Maybe she'll try. Maybe they'll try and mea culpa it somehow and figure out how to get out from under it. But
they're at the decision. They're at the crossroads right now, and I think Sylvester is the one. He's the one who's a little more hip to this is a problem. And
Yeah.
Felix is kind of in keeping with that whole theme of the rabbit hole. Like, we've already started down this journey, may as well just forge ahead and see where it takes us. But I think these guys are obviously the low men on the totem pole.
Yeah.
They are probably required to pass some series of tests in order to get a job there.
Yeah.
But they're not, Felix, I guess, is kind of aspiring to something greater. But
yeah.
I have a feeling most of the dudes that work down there are kind of Neanderthals, and as evidenced by some of the video footage that we've seen. And they're just content to show up, punch the clock, do their thing, and go home.
Good old Destin.
So, yeah. So I'm not too surprised in thinking that they're just kind of dumb. Some of them are probably kind of oafish.
Yeah.
In a way. I mean, they reasonably so. They have to be somewhat intelligent, I think, to work there. But I think that they're kind of okay with self-preservation being the ultimate goal, and whether it be an attempt on their life or just job security. They seem to kind of be like, well...
But the main thing to me is I feel like once they're out of that room and Maeve goes back, like, what... Even just the first time that it happened to Felix, where she woke up again.
Yeah.
And they didn't even necessarily have a conversation as of yet. She's like, we need to continue our conversation. It seems like she's been telling it. I feel like he should have even realized that he's not, like, there's nothing that's keeping him from putting an end to that situation early
Felix,
on.
You're saying?
Felix, yeah.
Okay.
And I guess, what you're saying is that he wants to see where it's going, but I don't even know if he's necessarily there, because I feel like Bernard was there with Dolores, which is what you brought up last episode. But Felix, I feel like, should, like, if that happened to me and I was like, man, I know I put her in sleep mode and she just keeps waking up, I would go to my manager and be like, hey, there's some crap going on here. We need to look at what's going on. Like, so I think there's an error there, but obviously for the sake of storytelling, I'm willing to let it go.
Yeah, the only other thing I can think of is we don't really know how long they've been working there. We don't know what jobs are like outside of Delos.
Yeah.
And whether or not what happens to employees who have tampered. If they have all been immediately prosecuted and sent to prison for.
Well, now that they're like, I get that they're pot committed now. Like, they've tampered, they are clearly implicated here. They would lose their jobs if this came out.
Right.
But there's still, I think there was enough time there, because at the end of episode 5, she woke up and said, Felix, we need to have a chat, with the bird on her fingers. Mm-hmm. And then the next episode, she apparently goes back at some point. They talked a little bit, but he hasn't made any changes to her yet or anything. Like, I feel like she doesn't have much there to like, she doesn't have anything on them in order to keep them committed to her schemes. So
the only other thing I can think of is maybe they're just too entranced by their encounter. Like, they essentially have met extraterrestrial life, and would you be able to turn away?
That's the thing, is that I think and what I had bought into after all of that in episode 6 was that I think Maeve can use her wiles and her programming to keep them on the line and doing what she wants them to do. So I think that's what it is, but I feel like there was still that moment there that was a little bit iffy. So
it's kind of one of those things that harkens back to you wouldn't really know how you would react until you're in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's putting yourself into their position, and can you really say what you would or wouldn't do if this essentially computer started talking to you and was seeking more and kind of. And you don't know how she would play on you either, you know what I mean? Like what she would prey upon in order to kind of twist you into her. I see what she's saying.
Yeah.
But I'm still kind of buying into it a little bit until something really batshit crazy happens.
Yeah.
I also think that they're probably waiting for a good opportunity to absolve themselves of the situation to where it can't be traced back to them. And because I think if you can't get rid of these things. You can't just throw her in the dumpster. Like, someone would say, where'd that model go? We needed her for this. There's clearly a very fragile web here of how these things are all connected to each other. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in terms of the actual episode.
Yeah. Katrine continues on to say, Dolores and William's storyline was hard to follow in this episode because compared to the Dallas storyline, it doesn't hold my interest, and I already forgot what it was they needed to do with the box of dynamite or the nitro. That's a shame. I like the characters, but something's off. I think it's a little bit of we didn't see any of them last week, so we're not moving along at the same clip and it's also not a lot happens with them. I mean, something big happens here with William, and we'll talk about that. But it does. They're being very incremental about it.
That's a great way to put it. I feel the same way even after this week's episode. I'm not particularly. I've become less invested with each passing week in them, and I think it's just because they haven't been woven into the overall fabric of the entire story yet. They're in their own weird pocket story, and until I can see how what they're doing relates to everything else, I feel like I just don't really care.
Yeah. And then last thing that I see, finally as a native Dane, I shall miss Sidis Babbitt Knudsen. That's a terrible pronunciation. I'm sorry. She did good except for her slightly cringy Danish accent. Other than that, nice to see the motherland representing in Westworld. So, yeah, she's been doing great. I liked her. I was calling quite a bit.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Thank you, Katrine.
As a native Dane. That's funny.
Yes. So we can move on to our episode recap. So I wanted to start today with Dolores and William, as we were just kind of talking about it. We get William and Dolores and Lawrence riding on the train through Ghost Nation territory. William and Dolores do finally hook up for once, as we all kind of assumed they were going to. And then, of course, the morning after is when the train almost gets derailed, and they end up escaping the Confederados and the Ghost Nation and finding this area that she drew on the dust cover in the train. So we talked about this a little bit. Not a lot going on here. I did want to kind of stop and say that it feels like this could maybe potentially, just to comment on this briefly, this could be that point where the Man in Black is born in the park. It sounds like, or it seems like, or we could be getting there with it. But the Man in Black talks about how he was born in this park is something that he kind of says, and I think everybody took it to be his character that he's playing was born in this park, and
or he was there and felt some sort of awakening that he hadn't prior.
Yes, and this could very well be that.
Picking up what you're laying down.
It seems like he's fallen into place. He's hook, line, and sinkered by the park.
He's bought in.
Yeah.
It does it for him.
And I'm wondering here if like the death of Dolores eventually could give him that full heel turn that we think he is as the Man in Black, you know?
There's something weird, you know, and
if that's true.
We'll keep it raising our hands.
Yeah.
Not that there's anything wrong with that. Nothing wrong with discussing it.
Yep.
But the only thing I'll say in regards to this theory that shall not be named is that the only detail that's kind of hinky to me is that the Man in Black shows no affection towards Dolores in present quote unquote day. Like when he drags her into the barn to cut her head off or whatever. He just refers to her as an old friend, unless he becomes so thoroughly jaded that he can't look back upon her with any affection.
Yeah.
But I find that inhuman.
Yeah.
That feels a step too far.
Yeah. I won't mention anything directly. As I said, we don't talk about the next time on in any detail. But I think there are things in the next time on that are calling a lot of stuff into question for me.
Well, I feel like we're following the trail to the maze, and it feels like we're following the trail to where whatever happened with Arnold went down. Because I think the flashbacks Dolores is having, if we're going to say, and I'm going to throw this out there, that we are sort of involved in three timelines. We'll say the timeline of Ford and Arnold and the ultimate death of Arnold or whatever happens to Arnold. We're following the Dolores William.
Yep.
And we're following the present day with Bernard and Cullen, et cetera,
and the board. Yep.
And the board. And I think that Dolores is having these flashbacks, this little town, the little
chapel,
church steeple. Some shit went down there, and I think that we're whether she knows it or not, we're following the trail back to there, and that seems to almost be where the maze sort of happens. If the maze is in fact the complex, which the maze could quite literally be just a maze of corridors and hallways.
Or it could be the overall experience of making it to that area.
That's the center of the maze. Yeah. The command center. Yeah. And, we'll see.
Yeah.
I thought back in episode 2 or 3, whenever that was, that Ford showed Bernard the steeple and said he's working on something big. I thought it would relate to that, but that seemed more like they were looking at that and it was like a memory for him. And Bernard doesn't see any significance to it. And it was Ford was just kind of talking. I
want to say something so bad right now, but it has to do with the next time on, and I can't say it.
Okay. I'm actually, one of my favorite burning questions is, what is Ford's new narrative?
Yeah.
I hope that we get to see it through and discover what it is, and that he doesn't just croak or something happens and we just never get to see and say, oh, it was just some crazy big shit like that. It feels like it's his opus.
Yeah,
he's building towards something grand and his finale, and I want to see what it is really bad.
Absolutely,
because I love.
I agree. But
other than that, the storyline of Dolores and William is just not. It's not really pulling me along. When the coolest part of it is Clifton Collins with like a rifle.
Yeah, repeater.
Yeah,
just
that was sweet.
Blowing up the dude filled with nitro. That was it was a cool moment. There were some people thinking, I was watching somebody stream about or talk about this on the internet last night. There were some people thinking that was milk coming out of the guy's eyes. I was like, no, it was nitro.
Right.
We saw them put the nitro into these bodies.
Yeah.
And then he shoots it and he explodes very violently.
It's not combustible milk.
No. So
there was something about that moment that struck me as so dumb, and I don't even remember what it is. Oh well, doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean the rocks on the train. I was like, yeah, this has got to be a setup or something. Somebody's coming for them, but yeah, I don't know.
It was something. No, it was something about sending the body out on the horse. I was kind of like,
I felt like they would have shot him immediately.
Yeah, or as they're riding away with the other 2 or 3 bodies, just shoot one of them.
Shoot one of those guys.
Just kill them all. It definitely kind of felt like a Fistful of Dollars kind of ploy.
A little bit.
It was kind of a throwback Western kind of moment of send out the body on the horse, and I don't know.
Yeah, the only other things I wanted to note, we did learn that Logan's sister's name is Juliet. I don't know if that'd be important or anything later on. And William has a moment where he says in Westworld he doesn't have to pretend. He can't go back now that he knows what this feels like.
Yeah.
Which I think is obviously a pretty big moment for him.
Mm-hmm.
I loved Clifton Collins Jr. or Lawrence saying "Vaya con Dios, motherfuckers," and shooting
was great.
the guy. It was a beautiful little moment. And then there are some people noting that as William and Dolores decide to forge ahead on their own, William says to Lawrence, I'm afraid this is where we part ways, which is apparently very similar to the way that the Man in Black said goodbye to Lawrence.
Oh, really?
Yes.
That's funny.
So.
Wonder what that means.
Yeah, I don't know. All right. So next up here, I'm going to go to Westworld HQ. We get a little bit of Bernard dreaming of Charlie, his son, reading him Alice in Wonderland.
Of course.
Bernard also goes to diagnose Hector. Just kind of a final QA check, I guess, to clear him after the update. It seems like they're talking about having a backlog and needing to work through that.
Mm-hmm.
So he diagnoses Hector and shows him the self-awareness protocol photos, and it seems like he's okay. Elsie started her leave today, according to a random dude in the hallway. What does that mean?
Shady.
Yeah, very shady.
What happens at big IT companies when your coworker is just not at work and some mysterious man who you've never seen until this point walks in and goes, she started her leave today.
And that's the thing. It's like they live there. They don't even go home and get we still don't even know if it's on Earth, for Christ's sake. Oh, she's on leave. What? That was funny. Chilling in the sea of tranquility.
I got a chuckle. I'm like, who's this Ricky J looking guy coming in and saying she's on leave?
Yeah. Bernard continues to try to locate Elsie with Cullen. They have a little conversation there. He doesn't tell her about what they found out. Cullen meets with Hale. I guess, did you have anything up to there?
No.
Nothing. There's nothing too crazy going on.
Please continue.
So Cullen meets with Hale. Hale's the nice board representative that we meet. She's banging Hector in her hotel room, butt naked with Cullen at the door. It seemed like some people are saying oh, this seems really weird to me. Why would she do that? I was like, it's a total power play, man. She's just being like, I can do whatever the hell I want here. I'm not threatened by you at all, Cullen. This is, you got to deal with me. Is kind of what I got out of the situation. How'd you feel about that scene?
I really don't like Hale.
Don't like her as in...
I don't like the actress.
Okay.
She feels
Tessa
like
Thompson.
She's incredibly overacting to me.
Some people are saying that she does... There's a lot of people calling into question the fact that she's a board member and she's that young and all this kinds of stuff.
I mean, that also seems true. And she seems to kind of express a long-term awareness of Cullen.
Yeah.
And she does seem like she's what, like 30
maybe.
Early 30s. Yeah. But I think she just is really disruptive to my enjoyment of the show. I think her acting is atrocious.
Interesting.
Ugh. Every line is overacted and feels awkward and stiff. Even her like body language, it just feels so over the top, and not in like a Sizemore kind of way where it feels controlled.
Yeah.
It feels like she may be a very capable actress in like another movie, but surrounded by all of these absolute top caliber actors, she sticks out like a sore thumb, and I think she's really bad.
Yeah, I mean, she didn't really bother me that much, but I think
we're just it could just be some shock because we're used to dealing with such nuance in this show, especially amongst the characters, because like Elsie says, everyone has an agenda, so everybody's very controlled and reined in, and here she comes swinging around, causing a scene, banging one of the hosts just for the hell of it, playing with Sizemore by not letting him know who she is. Like, she's clearly there to cause a dust up.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm just not responding well to that. But we've got some broader characters on the show. So, like, Logan's pretty broad. And the Man in Black is sometimes pretty broad with his actions and his words and his acting. And something about her, I don't know. And I could totally be the only one who thinks that, but I was pulled out of it right away.
I don't think you are. I think there are a lot of people that are thinking that way.
Yeah, I just got sucked right out of it. I was like, oh, this sucks.
Yeah, I don't know.
The scenes just felt really bad after that. Like when she when she lays down on the couch and she's talking to Cullen, her head is on the armrest and she's like Harley Quinn. All of a sudden I was like, what the shit is this? This isn't interesting to me anymore.
Yeah.
But we'll see what happens next week.
Yeah.
But I actually couldn't pay attention to the dialogue because I was so distracted. I got the gist of the scene.
And I did want to run through real quick. We kind of learned that obviously the board is doing she calls it a little research project. They care about the code in the park, which apparently has not been backed up at all after 35 years because Ford won't let that happen.
That's great.
Which I assume... And I believe later on gets confirmed that Cullen is using the satellite uplink to get that data out to the board.
Right.
Because she's using a Delos satellite, so obviously. And then the board needs a blood sacrifice to show how dangerous the hosts are. And they want somebody thoroughly unexpected, which leads us to the demonstration. They pull Clementine out. They pull Clementine out of the park, and then they send a programmed host to be recognized as a human in there to interact with her. And in her current state, post-reverie rollback, she does not harm the guy, but when they put her in the reverie mode, she basically dismantles this dude very easily. And they mentioned that it all was very ham-fisted and it felt very, it felt like Cullen and Hale were kind of being like, look at these bad things. This is all bad, and this could mean this. And they were laying out this equation to these two people that are the smartest people in the park. And I was like, I don't think Bernard says later on, Ford, I saw through that. What is Ford going to think?
Oh, I know.
And that's exactly how it felt to me in the moment, too. Although I was worried that Stubbs was going to die.
This could mean this. It's my favorite thing that you said. That should be the tagline for the show. This could mean this. It felt like they were just it was like one of those really bad, like, it was
step 1, step 2, step 3, ... step 4, profit. Like, that's what it felt like to me.
It felt like watching someone demonstrate a ninja blender in a mall. Like, it was very clunky and felt really scripted and just stiff and dopey.
Yes.
I will agree. I mean, as far as what was happening in the scene, I also thought the whole thing was kind of felt that way as a viewer of the show. I was kind of like, this doesn't feel like it was done. I don't know. I guess that's probably by design.
I think that's
what's happening in the scene. Yeah. But I remember kind of thinking ultimately, like, okay, so their entire play here is just to try to get rid of Ford, to get Bernard to roll over on Ford, and have cause to go after Ford. But the funny thing was, and I know that's what would happen, but I'm also thinking, if they're able to, at the push of a button, turn them back into the previous, just do that to everyone in the park.
Yeah.
Like if you have that solution, I understand that they're using this to leverage Ford out, but it's really funny that if they could just press a button on the tablet and then just be like, oh, she's back, she's safe, we're good.
I think some of that might be like you and I don't really understand board politics very much.
No, I mean I understand politically what's going on, and I understand that although the solution may be that simple, that it could still get someone fired.
Yeah.
It's
and they also want him out
of
there.
It's like releasing a minivan or some product without a warning label on it, and then just like, oh, well, we have this easy solution. Here it is. Be like, well, sorry, you're still going to get fired for it because you screwed up.
Somebody has to
I get
go.
it. I get what would happen in real life, but it still just is so goofy.
Yeah.
Especially you would think in a more sophisticated time. But Ford, as we know, and as we learn even further, is kind of invaluable to the whole process, and he's not going to let anything go until he's ready to on his terms. And it seems like if they're going to mess with the bull,
they're going to get the horns.
Yeah.
Bernard not rolling on Ford was like I can't really put words to how I reacted to that, but I was kind of like, man, he's really willing to take that fall for Ford.
I think he also would have maybe hoped that if he just let the scene play out and call their bluff, so to speak, see what happens.
Yep.
Because can they really fire him for that? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
She says she can, but
yeah.
Does she speak for the entire board? Can she overrule Ford like that? What percent of the board is he? Is he 51%? You know what I mean? That kind of thing. So anyway, I think he made the right move by not flinching and just kind of letting it happen.
Yeah. I feel like he would have talked to Ford later on and been like, what do we do here?
Yeah, exactly.
Ford would have been like, just chill, bro.
Plus, he still has shit on his mind. He's got to talk to Cullen.
Yep.
So he's just going to take the public lashing in front of everybody and then
deal with it later.
Yeah.
Yep.
Plus, he probably still wants to maintain Ford's trust at that point because clearly he's suspicious and wary of what Ford's got going on.
Yeah. All right. Well, I wanted to take a break there to go and talk about Maeve. Was there anything else you wanted to say before we get into that? Just in terms of those couple
No,
of
are we going to
scenes?
go back to the scene when...
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. All right. So then we've got Maeve. Maeve wakes up in the park. It's a random day, normal day, whatever, until she just decides to turn off the player piano.
Big guy gets killed again.
Big guy does get killed again. But...
always cracks me up.
Although I don't necessarily know if that was Big Guy.
Oh, yeah, it was for sure.
You're sure? Because they seem like the same two people. So it seems like they're...
The guy in the trench coat was definitely the huge guy. And it's really funny because he turns and he starts to draw and then he just stands there and waits for the guest to fumble their pistol out and shoot him. I was like, this guy's literally programmed just to do that and wait for somebody to kill him. It's so awesome.
I guess I just wasn't thinking that the guy that's killing him was was a guest. Like it seemed so scripted to me, but maybe that's because it's the beginning of the park.
Yeah,
like the
I would say it's.
there.
I mean, it's definitely a guest.
It's got to be
he's
very
pulling his pistol out like an total
idiot.
jackass. Yeah, and the dude just stands there kind of like this and waits for it. It's really funny. Like that really cracked me up. I was like, I love watching this play out in the background all the time.
Yeah. And yeah, so she shuts off the player piano. Very interesting. And that's when they take Clementine out of the park in the middle of the day. And Maeve, why isn't Maeve frozen?
I think she's too aware now for that to happen.
That's weird to me though. I guess because they did suggest that there was somebody else altering her personality. So maybe
that could be
whoever's doing that has disabled her from the normal.
I think that maybe she's just kind of attained a new level of enlightenment, so to speak.
Yeah.
So like a way that if somebody studies and trains and practices meditation, or they can gain some elevated control over their body that the rest of us can't, like in order to tune out pain, for example, or something like that.
That may be it, but I just feel like it still comes down to programming to me. But
we don't know how they work.
We don't.
Everyone in the show even says that. We don't know how they work. And we, at best, we have a loose yoke around them and we can kind of steer them and keep them at bay. But what if they loose their head from the yoke and they're able to look around?
Yeah.
We don't have that same control.
That's true.
She is kind of the next step in a way. She's kind of like the evolution. She's above even them. And they're above us, so to speak. So I think... I that's what I took it as immediately. I was like, oh wow, she can't be turned off. Right now. She can be killed and reinserted, and
that's fair. Yeah,
it was awesome. I loved that.
It was very cool.
That was again super scary.
Yeah,
I was like, And I should be scared of Maeve at this point.
Yeah.
But in that moment, I was totally like, oh, fuck, this is really creepy.
Yeah.
Like, it's those suits, those containment suits are so eerie.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's great. It was a great scene.
Then later on, we see Maeve waking up in Westworld HQ. She wants to see Clementine, and she sees Clementine get decommissioned by Sylvester. And, and in front of Cullen. That's when we see Bernard pull Cullen away, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
Yes. We know you're all waiting.
Yes, and then Sylvester and Felix try to appeal to Maeve, and that, they had to do it, and he did it for you. But Maeve ultimately wants to get out of the park. And Sylvester explains that everything was designed to keep them in the park. She gets this sweet line about, you think I'm scared of death. I've done it 1,000,000 times, and I'm fucking great at it. How many times have you died? Very nice.
It was awesome.
And then she tells him, if you don't help me, I'll kill you. And we hear that Westworld cue from the original movie. The kind of percussive sound.
Oh, yeah.
It plays in that moment. I was like, ooh. So now I want to go back and watch the whole show so I can listen for that where it pops up in more places. Maeve's headed for some crazy stuff.
Yeah, and the way she said that, and the notion that she has died tons of times, and she's now presumably able to recall a lot of her memory. It's pretty awesome. Like, that's a force to be reckoned with. It's kind of like the Seraphims in Preacher, to go back to Gone to Texas for a second.
Yeah,
they just keep coming back,
and
you can't keep them down. And
absolutely,
that's a whole other kind of scary. It's almost. It's like the Terminator, really. And
it's like the Terminator, which was inspired by Westworld.
First Terminator film, like you couldn't stop.
I did read up on that, and that Arnold apparently studied Yul Brynner's performance in Westworld to kind of bring that to the Terminator.
He says that now.
He said, well, no, but that was like...
Oh, I know it was inspired thematically. I just always like to believe that Arnold was such a bad actor, like that he thought he was acting. Like
That's possible too.
He thought that was him.
He had all of the acting prowess as a gunslinging robot in the 70s.
Yeah, he thought he was turning in a great performance, and it's like the most wooden thing ever. I love it. Most mechanical, I guess, would be better.
Yeah.
No, I did like that line quite a bit.
Yeah.
I think Maeve wanting to get out of the park is pretty wild.
Yeah, but ultimately it feels like to me that it's once again the Greyhound. Calls back to the Greyhound story of like, when she gets out, where is she? What is she going to do? Like, that's crazy.
Well, yeah, what are you going to do, and why do you want to do it?
Yeah.
Like, I think that in Westworld, if she played her cards right and stayed, she could become a god, essentially. She could run it.
Yeah.
And once she gets out, it's like, you're the fish who runs the pond, and when you jump out, what then?
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of, if we're going to talk comics for a hot second, in Fantastic Four, one of the characters, the daughter of the daughter of Reed and Sue Richards, Valeria, she has a really hilarious relationship with Dr. Doom, and they like respect each other on like on a peer level, and she asks him something. I'm going to ruin it now because I don't remember the context, but she asks him why he wants to do something, or how he thinks he can achieve something that seems so crazy. It's like end of the world type stuff. It's really cool. It's at the end of the whole series by Jonathan Hickman. And Doom turns to Valeria and says, I was a god once, Valeria. I found it boring, or something like that. He says, I found it beneath me, or something like that. And like Doom is kind of that character where he strives for these insane heights and he achieves them. And then he's like, well, what now? Like, done. Check it out the bucket list.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I feel about Maeve. She might be setting herself up for kind of a fall. Like, but I guess that could be fixed with a turn of a dial, turn her into a dummy again, or is she beyond that now? Can they scale her down from where she is? Yeah, I don't know. That's another scary thought. I do love the scene with her talking to Clementine. It's kind of a two-parter. Her talking to Clementine in the bar, and then Clementine being lobotomized and decommissioned. Because Maeve is listening to her tell this whole story, and Maeve is aware that none of it's real.
Yep.
And Clementine believes it, knows it, in fact, to be her story, and that she's got family waiting there, and that her goal is to move somewhere cold. And that was such a heartbreaking scene because of what Maeve is thinking, but also what Clementine's thinking, but also I really liked it because it was kind of opposite of what you always hear. Like it seems like a minor detail, but I like that she said she wanted to move somewhere colder, and I thought that was really interesting because in movies there's always these characters that want up for a better life. They always kind of want to move somewhere warmer.
Well, and we who live
appealing.
in Michigan, of course, that's all most of our friends say when the snow rolls around.
Yeah, I like it here. I don't know what they're talking about.
I don't know what they're talking about either.
But yeah, that scene was really amazing. That was some of my favorite writing, I think, of the series, and Tandy Newton continues to just crush it. Every time she steps up to the plate.
She's acting with muscles that I didn't know existed
in her face.
Yeah, it's insane. And yeah, just that I wrote in the notes, Maeve falls slightly for her story, or at least her programming is what I wrote for it. Of like, she's not falling for the story per se. She's falling for the fact that like, oh, you think this is true.
It's so yeah, she pities her, I think, in that moment because she's watching her talk about this and think like, man, she really believes that. And I think in that moment, she also kind of self-reflexively pities herself because she was that way for so long.
Yep.
Yeah, she's Tandy Newton is just killer. She's the Lady Anthony Hopkins of this show.
Yes, absolutely.
Those two need to have an act off in a room. It'd be awesome.
That'd be pretty good.
Maybe we'll get that. It seems like that scene might be coming.
That could be down the pipeline. All right, and then we can get to the piece de resistance to continue the French theme of the episode.
Let's do it.
Bernard and Cullen, they have a little conversation after she gets pulled out of Clementine's decommissioning, and Bernard talks about how he knows about the satellite uplink, and kind of tells her what he thinks is kind of how Ford is going off the rails. And then he takes her to go and check out the house that he discovered last week. I did want to note, Cullen gets very personable with Bernard after he kind of rips the facade off of her a little bit, which I thought was a nice touch of showing that she's not just being a monster in terms of like, she starts calling him Bernie and talks about how she just wanted to protect the park and things like that. I think I read that as her pulling, like, I feel like every time that we've seen them interact since they broke up, quote unquote, you see a pain in her face where she really wanted to be with him. At least that's what I thought. Think so. And so when he kind of calls her on everything that's gone on or that he thinks is going on, I think she kind of reverts back to the, I care about you. And so I thought that was cool.
I would say either that or that's her play.
Maybe that's her play, but I
think you could take it either way, and it's acceptable for sure.
Yeah.
It's sad that we don't know.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
So then in the house, we did get a line from Bernard, the longer I work here, this is in the elevator, the longer I work here, the more I think I understand the host. It's the human beings who confuse me. A little bit of momentary foreshadowing there.
There's a lot of lines I think we're going to look back on with a whole different view now.
Yes.
I do love her line, too, about we're going up into the park at night. Should we have a security team? And I'm like, why doesn't anyone else ask this question?
Well, and at least this time Bernard has a good reason. I guess Elsie did, too, if she didn't believe anybody. But at least she could have brought Bernard with her.
Although he does have the counterpoint, we can't trust anybody.
Yeah.
And that's probably what Elsie is thinking as well.
Maybe so, but like you would think that she would, like she's been talking with Bernard about it. Why not take him? But,
Oh, well.
So then we proceed into the house, and the hosts are gone. Ford's family are gone, and they're kind of walking in there. They remark that nobody's seen this house. It's not on any of the plans. The surveyors don't see it. All this kinds of stuff. Bernard explains the hosts are programmed to ignore the place. They couldn't see it if they were staring right at it. And then that's when we walk into that room. And as the camera angle, we see that camera angle, there's no door there or anything, and then it pans away, and then we hear her say, what's behind this door? It pans back. There's a door there that we didn't see before. And Bernard says, what door?
What door?
Oh.
The line heard round the world.
God, it was so good.
It was amazing. That was one of those moments that we used to get with Lost, where a question would be answered or a line would be said that we've been waiting for a character to say.
Yeah.
Or we get this watershed moment, and just to have it summed up in 2 words like that and have all of these just so much came crashing down in that moment. It was amazing.
Absolutely. And he said, "What door?" And my heart just broke.
Mine stopped. It didn't break, but it just stopped.
I was just like, "Oh my God, Bernard's a host," and it like overwhelmed me in that moment. And Jesus.
And it's funny because we've been talking about this idea for some time now, and yet even when faced with the reality of it, it's kind of horrifying. It's kind of like, what does it mean? Like, we thought it might happen, but now that it's here, we're like, oh,
what
God.
are the implications?
It's kind of like the election, really. Like, some of us may have thought in the back of our mind, could it happen? It could happen.
But hopefully it won't.
But now that it's here, everyone's kind of aghast. I don't think we've ever, I mean, obviously I haven't been alive that long, but I don't know if an election has ever been met with such outright shock.
Yeah.
To where even the elect is shocked, as clearly evidenced by pretty much every televised
interviews.
appearance since then.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
The show, not the election's amazing too,
but in different ways.
But yeah, but this moment in the show, I mean, it rewrites everything. It redefines everything, and it's incredible. That
we now can't trust any scene with Bernard.
My perception of reality has been questioned now, and anything and everything is suspect. And I don't know. The only two people who I know are humans are Cullen and Ford. Anyone else is up for grabs. Really, it's pretty. It's pretty staggering.
Yeah.
No, it's wonderful. It's I love it. Mm-hmm. It's great.
Bernard explains once they go down the stairs that this is a remote diagnostic facility used when the park was in beta. It seems that it looks a lot like the areas where Arnold or Bernard is talking with Dolores in the past. Supposedly.
I bet it's right around the corner.
Yeah,
like, we didn't see the full space, and I'll bet.
Well, no, I think we do really see the full space.
You think
and
that's it?
It looks like that is the room, or at least one very much like it. So if there's other ones hidden, it seems like it could very much be built that way. He notes that the machinery that's in there is newer, but slower. So it's not like that would have been there in the past.
I wonder who he's building.
There are some thoughts that it could be Cullen.
Oh, God.
Which is mortifying.
Oh, you're probably right.
But we'll see. Who knows?
Wow.
Yeah.
I hadn't even thought about that. I hadn't even asked the question until like 10 seconds ago.
Yeah, I really don't know like who else he could be potentially building. It's
Yul Brynner.
Yeah. Hopefully.
Same timeline. No, well, I want to note right now before we get any further into the scene, I was so impressed with how Jeffrey Wright's performance absolutely changed right after the what door line.
Yes.
Everything was different about the way he spoke, the way he looked, the look in his eye, the way it was phenomenal.
Mm-hmm. There was an interview with Jonathan Nolan and Lisa Joy where they talk about it a little bit and how he knew earlier on, Jeffrey Wright knew a little bit earlier on than anybody else that he was a host.
Okay.
And so apparently they were remarking about his decisions and how he performed, like played certain spots that felt like him playing a robot that thinks he's not a robot is prevalent throughout the series. So I'm very interested to go back and look at him more closely and see what feels robotic and what doesn't.
Right.
And look at the choices that he made. So it's very
because before he just comes across as like kind of a slightly awkward programmer, a guy who's all about his work, a
slightly asocial kind of So it's very interesting. Yeah. So then Cullen gets a look at some schematics. There's one for Robert, which is the young boy. We get one for Dolores,
and we know it's coming.
And then that third one is, of course, Bernard. And that's when all doubt is obviously removed that Bernard is a host.
I'm so glad that everything played out in that moment because I was really, really concerned they were going to end the episode without Bernard knowing, or at least not that he knows, but without him being confronted with it and without somebody else, without this mystery being figured out.
Yeah.
Because we know, and sometimes I enjoy when the audience knows and the characters aren't privy to certain information. But in this instance, I was like, let's just get it out there.
Yeah. And somebody noted on Reddit, it's like the moment with what door was for us.
Right.
And then the schematic is for Cullen.
Right. And
so that's when she realizes. And
it's
and
really
Bernard.
interesting how Bernard passes through the door and doesn't ask,
exactly.
what am I doing right now? And I guess it's basically like the hosts in the park when someone says, hey, so you're a host, what's up? Or you're a robot. And they just are programmed to kind of just skirt the issue.
Maybe he switched into that tour guide mode that we were kind of talking about or something like that, where he's just being pulled along. But I was kind of wondering that too, of like, how does he even comprehend that?
Mm-hmm.
And I will note that there is the moment where Ford appears out of nowhere in that house. He's standing right in front of where that door is.
He came up from the basement.
Yep. Yeah, which is great. But yeah, so it's something that we texted about a little bit, whether or not the name Arnold is on that page. I've kind of come around. I think it says Bernard.
It probably says Bernard.
I think it says Bernard because otherwise I feel like
Cullen would
have been
would raise the other eyebrow.
Yeah, because she very much she even has the question: is this what you did to Arnold? So it's not. Did you have Bernard kill Arnold? Is essentially what she asks.
Right.
So it's kind of like, it's not like she would know that he's a replica if he is. Yeah, we don't know yet. But then we get a great discussion with Ford and Cullen about. She thinks he's a monster, and he says that the hosts are actually the ones who are free in this park under his control, which I felt was like a very Loki statement.
It was interesting. I kind of took it two ways. One being, like you said, it's a very kind of, it's a little sadistic. And
subjugation.
He's having some fun with it.
Yes.
But I think also he's kind of implying that they are free as long as he's the one in control.
Yeah,
like he's kind of the benevolent overlord, and he tries to make the best life and best existence for them that he can. And I think he might be implying that should the board or somebody else seize control of the park, quality of life for the hosts would be altered, essentially.
Yeah, that's entirely... Yeah.
I think deep down inside, and we're going to talk about Ford a lot more in the coming weeks, I'm sure, and tremendous amount in the recap episode, but I think Ford has a love for these things. He has a respect, and in ways... like Bernard says, he understands them better than humans. I think Ford understands humans very well, which is what puts him in the position he's in. Yeah. But I think he definitely has... I mean, they're his creations. He loves them,
Absolutely.
as hopefully any loving God would. So it's a great relationship that he has with the park.
Yeah. Yeah, and even just the idea that we as humans are not free of our own demons, I think it's a very obvious. It's not like a very particularly poignant statement, but it still is. It's interesting to think of it that way. That they, as the creations, can have that stripped of them from their programming.
Yeah, and obviously the whole series has been calling into question this notion of free will, and it's going to bring it up even more now with the discovery of Bernard, and also just this idea that they live the freest lives of all under his control. Like, do we really, when we think we're choosing, are we choosing?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or is that the choice we were always going to make?
Mm-hmm.
It's awesome. It's really fun stuff to think about. Some light Sunday night viewing.
Light and breezy, just to get your...
just popped right over to the New England Seattle game right after that, and I was like, didn't even feel the transition.
And then, so we get a little bit... we have a little bit of repeated dialogue here where Ford mentions that the board needs a blood sacrifice. Some people have kind of calling that into question of like, well, is Charlotte Hale, Tessa Thompson's character, the board member, is she some kind of host? But Jonathan Nolan was kind of like, hey, Hector was in that room. Ford has access to everything. Maybe Hector heard that conversation. Obviously Ford is very invested in figuring out what the board wants and what they want to see and what they're trying to do. So he would maybe be spying on them using...
Interesting.
That kind of technology is kind of the implication there, I think.
Yeah, I kind of I got a weird vibe from that whole situation that I'm now that I'm thinking about it further, I'm almost certain is wrong. But I kind of got the understanding because Cullen says something to the effect of they want to fire Ford, they want to replace Ford, and he says our arrangement is far too valuable. Yeah. And then when he calls that blood sacrifice line to her, I almost got the vibe that Ford and the board are in cahoots.
Yeah, and I could maybe see a little bit of that too, but I don't understand why the wool would be over But maybe.
Or at least Ford and a portion of the board.
Yeah.
And maybe there's like a divide in the board because we know Cullen is feeding data to somebody.
Yeah.
And I kind of got the vibe that Hale has that meeting with Cullen to prompt her into action.
Yeah.
And maybe there are more chess pieces here than we know. And maybe Ford, if I'm going to believe in this theory, maybe Ford and Hale are on the same page. And Ford knows he has control of Bernard. And he basically tells Hale, you've just got to force Cullen into a confrontation in which Bernard gets fired and can talk to Cullen. Because if he just told... I guess he could it begs the question, why didn't he just tell Bernard, hey, go talk to Cullen, bring her down here
yeah.
before this confrontation? But maybe it needed
Which is kind of what he says he did.
Yeah.
Even to her.
Yeah, that he asked Bernard to bring her down.
To bring her down, yeah.
It's interesting. I got to see one more episode to really think any more about it. But the way Ford said that, it seemed... And also when he said to Cullen, oh, they're already here. Like, I think I think maybe that the notion that we've been presented with a dissatisfied board is maybe not entirely true. Maybe there is an arrangement there between them and Ford, and maybe
Cullen was just the one with the big aspirations to get Ford out of there.
And maybe this notion of a blood sacrifice has been done before. Maybe the board has offered up people to Ford for some nefarious purpose in the past, and she just happened to be the lamb that was chosen and sent to slaughter, because either she had bigger aspirations or they knew she would not play nice and go along with whatever the grand scheme is.
Yeah.
Maybe the giant new narrative that Ford is working on with the board is something that they're interested in.
Maybe.
And Hale did say that there's more there's more to the park than just the host, and she says, do you really think that's all that's going on here?
Yeah.
And the man in black knows that. He knows there's something bigger about the park. Maybe the board and Ford are working together to get to the bottom of Arnold's ultimate mystery.
Yeah.
And the man in black is also pursuing it. I don't know. I can't wait.
Well, yeah, and then there's the idea that I think we've talked about where maybe the man in black is Ford's tool to figuring out Arnold.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe he says he's smarter than that, or he's more dogged than me, certainly. He's younger.
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyway, on with the scene.
Yeah, so basically they have that little conversation, but then ultimately it ends in Bernard murdering Cullen at the request of Ford. Yeah.
It was pretty gnarly.
It was terrifying.
It was so methodical.
Yeah. And that shot of seeing the new person being created as her life is ending was kind of like that circle of life moment of like, it's a little bit, it could be a suggestion to maybe that's actually Cullen being built right now, but I don't know.
Maybe the blood sacrifice is getting rid of a high-ranking member and putting a host in their place so they'll have more control.
Maybe
the board... We don't know much about the board. We don't know anything about the board. We don't know how long they've even been in the picture.
Yeah.
But I was thinking maybe Arnold was dispatched in the same way.
Yeah.
For the same reason.
Yeah, and that's kind of... Yeah, like...
But then you'd think they would just have a host called Arnold. That was Arnold.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. I don't know.
Whatever.
I don't know.
Yeah, scene was amazing. Jeffrey Wright. Taking off that coat and that tie, it was crazy.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And I did want to note the final line of it. Ford tells Bernard to get back to work. They have a lot of work to do on the new story lines.
Mm-hmm.
He says plural. So that seemed interesting.
I'm really curious to see how the relationship between Bernard and Ford is from this point out. I think that the temptation and probably the gut reaction from most viewers is to probably dismiss Bernard as a character and be like, okay, he's just a puppet.
Yeah. And
no longer be invested in him. But we know that Maeve and Dolores, for example, are evolving beyond their current their ideal programmed state, and I'd be disappointed if Bernard was relegated now to just a henchman. I feel like they've invested us in him enough, and they've set him up enough to where he's gonna evolve as well and probably start to question things. And I don't know if he's gonna remember anything, and if we're gonna be forced to feel sorry for him while he stumbles around and doesn't know where Cullen is, that sort of thing.
Well, we were there was somebody talking about online because they mentioned last episode that all the hosts are set to 14 in terms of their bulk apperception that keeps their intelligence at a manageable level. Some people online suggested that maybe Bernard, somebody like Bernard, maybe they're kept at 14 so that a host like Bernard could be set at a 20 to kind of proceed over them in that kind of way.
Well, but Bernard is also off the books. He's a secret project, and he might be a 50.
He could be something insane.
Yeah, we don't.
So
clearly, he's very intelligent. So it's quite shocking.
Yeah.
Even we may have seen it coming, but it's still.
Yeah, it still affected me in a very interesting way. Like I still.
It's amazing as I simultaneously, like you, I felt sad and I felt excited and I felt interested and I felt happy in a weird way, just like that it's
like we're going there.
That's something really big has happened finally, because it feels like we've had many episodes of setup, and I'm waiting for the next 3 to just be nothing but payoff. And although that may end up being kind of an uneven seesaw in the end, and I'll be kind of like, well, here I am on this one end, and here's this giant weight on the other, making the season feel unbalanced in the end. I don't know. I guess we'll see.
Yeah, we'll have to see how this goes. I don't know what I'm expecting out of the next episode, but
me either.
It's yeah. Shit's crazy.
It is. It's really amazing.
Yeah.
This episode felt very satisfying to me after the last. I think the last 2 I was a little ho-hum on.
Yeah.
I liked the previous one a lot because the Maeve storyline was very engaging, but this one, the ending left me very excited. This would be the point where, like back in the day, the Lost logo would pop up and I'd be like, okay, one more, and it'd be 2 in the morning.
Yep.
Because that did happen.
I did want to say that the music in this episode is fantastic. In particular, as normal, I watched this at least 2 times before we record. I did end up watching the last 20 minutes again with Nicole because she had to finish it today. But knowing when things were coming and listening to the music as it's happening and seeing as things turn, it was there's a great cue when Bernard says what door. There's another great cue when he starts realizing it, and it's phenomenal.
I realize now I did notice the music too during the what door moment, and that will, I don't know what's to come in the next 3 episodes, but that moment for now is poised to go down as my favorite absolute moment in the entire series. And I think I just realized when you said musical cue, why it reminds me so much of Memento.
Yeah,
it's that moment when we see Leonard's memory go and we see him renew it.
Yeah,
and we feel this mix, the exact same mix of feelings of sadness and
of
excitement.
Like, oh God, what is this going to mean?
Yeah. And we pity him.
Yep.
In every one of those instances, and who knows how many times this has happened to Bernard in the past, and he doesn't even know it. And Jeffrey Wright's performance in the moment when he's saying, "I have a son," he's like, "I can't be one of them," and we're watching him struggle with this discovery.
Yeah,
and it's heartbreaking.
Absolutely,
he just he's not allowed to feel those feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of the way that Leonard Shelby can't mourn properly if he can't remember. And it's like we mourn for him, the fact that he's not permitted
Absolutely.
to feel the way we do.
Absolutely. Well,
would recommend.
Absolutely.
10 out of 10.
Yes.
Would watch again.
Yes. That's about it for this episode. You can find more episodes of our podcast on westworld.fm. We're also on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Google Play Music Podcasts, and more. So let us know if we're not on your favorite podcatcher. We'll get it up on there for sure. We're also Westworld FM on Twitter, and you can email us westworldfm@gmail.com to tell us what you think of our show and share your thoughts on HBO's Westworld so we can read them on our show. Send us corrections, observations, or anything regarding Westworld or our podcast. Please go on iTunes. Even if you don't listen on iTunes, go and give us a rating and review because that will help us become more visible, and hopefully we'll get more listeners and be a very successful podcast. And that means we can continue with the season 2 when season 2 of Westworld hits the airwaves. So please help us out there. And then if you want to check out other podcasts on the Midwest Podcast Network, go to midwestpodcastnetwork.com. And that's it for our episode this week. Obviously, we're excited for the next episode, and we'll have another episode of our podcast out after that. But until then, may you rest and have a deep and dreamless slumber.